Michael thought he had it all: loyalty, vision, and a best friend by his side. Together they built a tech startup from scratch, fueled by passion and sleepless nights. But just as the company tasted success, everything unraveled. One signature, one silent betrayal, and he was erased from his own dream. Stripped of credit, ownership, and trust, Michael faced the ultimate question: walk away or fight back harder than ever before. Michael never craved the spotlight. He was the kind of guy who preferred code to conversation, algorithms to applause. At 32, he had already made a name for himself in San Francisco's buzzing tech community, not as a loud founder or flashy speaker, but as a brilliant software engineer who could build just about anything from scratch. Quiet, sharp, intensely focused, he was the kind of talent every startup needed, but few truly appreciated. Michael's apartment in the Mission District was a small, cluttered space filled with dual monitors, half-assembled circuit boards, and a whiteboard full of abstract flowcharts only he could understand. He lived simply. Coffee hoodies and endless lines of code, that was his world. He didn't care about fancy cars or downtown lofts. What he wanted was impact, something meaningful, a legacy. And he thought he'd found that in David Chen, his best friend from college. David was everything Michael wasn't. Charming, loud, endlessly confident, and a natural in any room. He had a gift for turning dreams into pitches and pitches into funding. They met during their sophomore year at Berkeley. Michael had helped David debug a project the night before a big deadline. From that point on, they were inseparable. Years later, while working their respective corporate jobs, Michael at a cybersecurity firm, David in venture consulting, they reconnected over drinks and frustration. They both hated the red tape, the politics, the way innovation was smothered by layers of bureaucracy. So they did what so many young tech visionaries in San Francisco dreamed of. They quit and launched a startup together. The idea was simple, yet powerful. A platform using AI to help small businesses streamline their operations without the need for expensive consultants. Something intuitive, elegant, and most importantly, empowering. Michael built the prototype in just 8 weeks. David pitched it to anyone who would listen. They worked out of a dingy garage in Potrero Hill, surviving on ramen and Red Bull. Every dollar went into servers and cloud space. They pulled all-nighters, debated UI colors at 3 a.m., celebrated every new user like it was Christmas. For Michael, it wasn't just about building a product. It was about building a future with his best friend by his side. They split the workload and, in theory, the ownership 50-50. But David handled the paperwork, the legal setup, the cap table, things Michael never paid much attention to. "You build it, I'll sell it," David always said. And Michael trusted him, implicitly. After all they'd been through, everything together. In the early days, no one believed in them. Investors laughed them out of offices. A few angel pitches went nowhere. But Michael kept refining the tech, and David kept knocking on doors. Then, in their 6th month, a tech blogger stumbled on their demo and wrote a glowing review. Overnight traffic surged. Emails flooded in. Suddenly, they weren't just another duo in a garage. They were founders of the next big thing. A venture capital firm scheduled a meeting. David showed up in a blazer, Michael in a hoodie. The contrast worked. They were the perfect archetype, the hustler and the hacker. The firm loved it. By the end of the quarter, they closed their first seed round, $1.5 million. Michael couldn't believe it. He remembered staring at the funding wire transfer on his phone, hands trembling. They were real now, no more garage. They moved into a sleek office in Soma with glass walls and ergonomic chairs. They hired a small team. David took the CEO title naturally. Michael became CTO. For a while, things were perfect. They celebrated their first paying clients with tacos and champagne. They gave each other side hugs and clinked beers, still amazed at what they'd built from nothing. But as the company grew, so did the distance between them. David started hosting meetings without Michael. Strategic decisions were made in closed rooms. Michael spent more time in the server room than the boardroom. Still, he didn't complain. That wasn't his style. He just assumed things would even out. After all, they were partners. Brothers, practically. One afternoon, while going through some onboarding docs for a new hire, Michael came across a line in the company overview, founded by David Chen. Just David. No mention of Michael. It stung, but he brushed it off. Probably just an oversight. He didn't care about titles anyway. But then, there were more signs investor meetings, where he wasn't invited press interviews that left him out entirely. And David's increasing tendency to refer to my company instead of our company. Still, Michael believed in what they were building. He kept his head down, writing code, fixing bugs, improving their machine learning model. That was his world, and he loved it. But behind the scenes, a different code was being written. One he hadn't seen coming. One that would erase him from everything he'd helped create. It started with a silence. A silence that crept into meetings where Michael used to have a voice. A silence in emails where he used to be CC'd. A silence in the way David looked at him. Not like a partner anymore, but like a resource. Michael tried not to read too much into it. Startups moved fast. Maybe David was just stressed. Maybe this was what scaling up felt like. But the unease grew gnawing at the edges of his trust. Then came the day that changed everything. Michael was helping onboard a new product manager. Part of the process involved giving her access to internal systems, including the company's cap table, a document outlining equity ownership. He logged into the platform, casually expecting to see what he'd always believed a 50-50 split between him and David. What he saw instead made his stomach drop. David Chen, 90%. Advisor shares, 10%. Michael's name wasn't listed. Not even under employee stock options. Nothing. His heart pounded. At first, he thought it was a glitch. Some kind of error. But the data was clear, legally binding, and time-stamped. The documents had been signed nearly a year ago, right around the time they raised their seed round. While Michael had been buried in code, David had quietly restructured the company. He wasn't just out of the loop. He was out of the company. Michael called David immediately. "Hey," David said cheerfully, oblivious or pretending to be. "What's up?" "I just saw the cap table," Michael said, his voice tight. "Why am I not listed?" A pause, just long enough to confirm everything. "Oh, yeah, about that," David said, his tone shifting into rehearsed calm. It was a legal thing needed to be streamlined for the funding. You know how VCs are. They want clean structures, but it doesn't change anything between us. Michael felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "So, you just took me off the ownership papers." "It was temporary," David insisted. "We were going to fix it after the funding closed, but then things move fast. Look, man, you're still CTO. You're still getting paid. We're building something huge here. Let's not get caught up in paperwork." Michael's hands were shaking. "That wasn't paperwork, David. That was my stake, my company. You erased me." David sighed, like he was the one being burdened. "Look, we can talk to legal, figure something out. Just don't make this a big deal. It's not worth blowing everything up over some misunderstanding." But it wasn't a misunderstanding. Over the next few days, Michael consulted 2 lawyers. Both gave him the same bleak answer: legally, he had no ownership. The paperwork he'd signed early on terms he barely skimmed because he trusted David had allowed for restructuring without requiring his consent. David had used that loophole to consolidate control. And now, unless Michael wanted to enter a long, expensive legal battle he couldn't afford, there was nothing he could do. He'd been played. Worse, he'd been played by his best friend. Michael stopped going to the office. He worked remotely. At first, still fixing bugs, still answering Slack messages, trying to pretend everything could somehow return to normal. But each line of code felt heavier tainted. One evening, he logged into the server to run a quick patch. His admin access was denied. A minute later, his company email deactivated. That was it. No meeting, no notice. Just a silent lockout. He stared at the blank login screen for hours numb. This was the company he'd built line by line. The product bore his fingerprints in every corner of its architecture, and now he was watching it vanish piece by piece, like someone deleting his life. Friends started reaching out. "Hey, are you still at Nova AI?" David said, "You stepped away. Everything okay?" Stepped away. That was the story. David was telling people that Michael had decided to leave, that he wasn't aligned with the company's future. Clean, professional, a graceful exit that didn't hint at betrayal. Michael didn't respond to any of the messages. What could he say? That he'd trusted someone too much. That he'd let his loyalty blind him. That he'd signed away his dream without reading the fine print. He walked through Golden Gate Park that night, the fog rolling in heavy and wet, the lights of the city blurred through his tears. His entire identity, his work, his partnership, his purpose had been built around that company, around David, and now it was all gone. Now. He considered disappearing, leaving San Francisco, giving up on tech altogether. But then something shifted. As he sat on a park bench watching the city glow from a distance, a thought surfaced, small but steady. He didn't get to define your legacy. Michael had been erased once, but not again. Not without a fight. Not this time. Michael didn't sleep for 2 days. Not out of stress, but purpose. He sat at his kitchen table laptop, open old notebooks scattered around him. Somewhere in those sketches, old journal entries and scrapped code bases, he believed the seed of something better still lived. Something that had never depended on David's charm or investor approval. He didn't want revenge. Not at first. He wanted clarity, a clean space to create again. But as he reread their earliest notes from Nova AI and remembered how much he had done the back-end infrastructure, the core algorithms, the entire data engine, it became clear David hadn't just stolen a company. He had stolen his future. And that lit a fire Michael hadn't felt in years. He went off the grid for a month. No social media, no texts, just code. He took walks through Dolores Park with a tiny notepad brainstorming features. He hit the gym to clear his mind. And then every night he returned to his apartment, opened his laptop, and built. But this time he wasn't building a company. He was building a weapon. Not to destroy David, but to render him irrelevant. He called it Sovereign. Where Nova AI had focused on helping small businesses optimize operations through predictive analytics, Sovereign would go one level deeper. It would use natural language processing and advanced decision modeling to recommend entire strategies based on user input behavior and sector data. Nova predicted. Sovereign advised. It was the difference between having a dashboard and having a digital COO. And it would be open source, at the core modular, customizable, community-driven. No gatekeeping, no slick investor decks, just brilliant tools for people who needed them. Michael knew it wouldn't be easy. He had no funding, no team, and no public profile. David had painted him as a burnout. Investors wouldn't take his calls, recruiters ghosted him, so he didn't try to convince them. He went to the people who knew. He started with old colleagues, engineers who respected his work, even if they hadn't spoken in years. Some were skeptical, some didn't reply, but a few did. And one of them, Priya Mehta, a machine learning specialist who'd worked with him 5 years ago, was immediately in. "I remember your code," she said in their first Zoom call. "It was clean, thoughtful, efficient. If you're doing something new, I want in." Priya brought 2 more friends. They weren't looking for salaries, they were looking for meaningful problems. And Sovereign was one. They met every night after their day jobs, hacking together features, testing models, arguing over use cases. It felt like the early days of Nova, but purer. No pressure from VCs. No spin. Just people who believed in solving hard problems for the right reasons. Word began to spread quietly, but powerfully. Michael posted a blog entry on Medium titled, "What Happens When They Erase You." It wasn't angry or dramatic. It was honest. A story about creation, betrayal, and rebirth. At the end, he wrote, "They can take your company. They can take your equity. But they can't take what's in your head. They can't take your ability to build again." The post went viral. Not among tech press or investors, but among engineers, indie founders, and disillusioned dreamers who'd been burned the same way. Comments poured in. People offered to contribute. A subreddit formed overnight. Sovereign wasn't just a product. It was a movement. 3 months in, they launched their beta. No fancy press release. No launch party. Just a GitHub repo and a 1-page website. Within 48 hours, it had 10,000 stars. Small businesses started signing up. Not through marketing, but through word of mouth. Sovereign solved real problems without locking people into contracts or forcing them through sales funnels. And that's when Michael knew he was no longer playing defense. He was building something David couldn't copy because David had never understood the technology. He had pitched what Michael built, but he hadn't created it. He didn't know the difference between a decision tree and a neural network. He could raise money, sure, but he couldn't rewrite an algorithm at 3 a.m. to stop a data leak. And for once, Michael wasn't trying to catch up to Nova. He was leaving it behind, but karma wasn't done yet. One afternoon, Michael's phone buzzed. It was Priya. "Hey," she said, "have you seen this?" She texted him a link. It was a TechCrunch article. Nova AI facing backlash over data privacy practices. Michael clicked. The piece detailed how Nova AI had been caught using client data without proper consent. Some businesses claimed their analytics had been sold to third-party vendors. An internal whistleblower had come forward. David was quoted saying it was a misunderstanding and that the company was reviewing its policies. Michael felt nothing. No schadenfreude, no joy. Just a quiet confirmation that he had made the right call. But the ripple effects kept growing. 2 days later, a major Nova client publicly announced they were switching to Sovereign. Then another. Then 5 more. Suddenly, Sovereign wasn't just a cool open-source tool. It was a viable alternative, trusted, transparent, and led by someone who actually understood the product. David's mask began to slip. He started tweeting vague insults about copycats and jealous ex-employees. Michael never responded. He didn't have to. The work spoke for itself. Then came the moment that changed everything. Michael was invited to speak at DevSphere, one of the most respected engineering conferences in the Bay Area. It was invitation only. No PR campaigns. No founder fluff. Just builders. He hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't his thing. But Priya convinced him. Your silence is powerful, Mike. But now your story matters. People want to hear from the guy who rebuilt himself. So he went. He stood on stage in front of 300 engineers and told the truth. Not just about Sovereign, about the cost of blind trust, about the difference between hype and substance, about what it means to be betrayed and come back better. The talk was raw, unpolished, and real. And when it ended, the entire room stood up and applauded. Michael walked off stage and into a crowd of strangers, shaking his hand, thanking him, not for revenge, but for resilience. And that's when the email came. Subject: potential acquisition discussion. It was from one of the largest cloud platforms in the world. They wanted to explore acquiring Sovereign not just for the product, but to lead a new division focused on ethical AI infrastructure. Michael didn't reply right away. He walked to his favorite coffee shop, ordered the same black drip he always did, and sat down with his laptop. He reread the email. Then he looked at the team, Slack buzzing with excitement over a new feature push. And he smiled. Because, for the first time in years, he didn't need anything. Not from investors, not from David, not even from the past. Sovereign was his now, not just in name, but in soul, and he had already won. The news broke quietly at first, just a footnote on a tech blog. Nova AI lays off 30% of staff amid investor unrest. But insiders knew what it meant. The house was on fire. More articles followed. Clients fleeing, board members resigning, lawsuits looming over data misuse. The whistleblower story had grown teeth. And worse, Sovereign had become the default alternative. Open source, transparent, and crucially led by someone with integrity. Michael hadn't intended to crush Nova, but Nova had left him no choice. And karma had excellent timing. 2 weeks later, Michael was sipping coffee at a co-working space when his phone buzzed with a notification. Incoming message from David Chen. He stared at the name for a long moment, then opened it. Hey, Mike. Long time. Hope you're doing well. I know things got messy between us, but I was wondering if we could talk. Something important came up. I think you might want to hear it. Michael didn't reply immediately, but curiosity won. They met in a quiet corner of the ferry building neutral territory with plenty of foot traffic. Michael showed up in jeans and a Sovereign hoodie. David was in a wrinkled suit, eyes bloodshot, trying to hide the fact that he hadn't been sleeping. Thanks for coming, David said, forcing a smile. Michael didn't shake his hand. David exhaled, nodded. Fair, he dove in. No pleasantries? Nova is out of runway. Investors are pulling out. We're bleeding clients. Our CTO just quit, and, well, you probably know a big part of that is Sovereign. Michael said nothing. David licked his lips. Look, I messed up. I know that. I got greedy. I thought streamlining things would help us close the round faster, and yeah, I used the moment to take control. I thought you wouldn't care, that you were too focused on the product to notice. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's your apology? David flinched. No, I'm sorry, I lost sight of what mattered. You were the heart of Nova, and everyone knows that now. Clients are literally asking if you're coming back. Michael sipped his coffee slowly. I'm not, I figured, David said quickly. But Here's the thing. There's a path where we both win. I've spoken with the board. They'd consider a merger. Nova folds into Sovereign, you take full control. We salvage what's left of the tech stack and client base, and I walk away. Michael blinked. It was the offer he never saw coming. David, the master of spin, was offering to surrender. On the surface, it was logical. Michael could absorb Nova's infrastructure, hire displaced engineers, grow Sovereign overnight, and David would be gone. But it also felt off. Why now? Michael asked. Why not just try to rebuild on your own? David looked away. Because I can't. The press won't touch us. The brand's toxic. My name's toxic. You've got something real. People trust you. We don't need to keep fighting. Michael studied him for a long moment. Then he asked, What do you get out of this? David hesitated. A clean exit. Maybe some equity in Sovereign if you're open to it. I need something. Anything. I'm not trying to screw you again, Mike. I'm trying to survive. That word survive hung in the air like a bitter echo. Once upon a time, Michael had begged just to exist in the company they built together. David had taken that away. And now here he was, broken, desperate, hoping for a lifeline from the man he betrayed. Michael stood up. David looked alarmed. Wait, just think about it. Please. At least meet with the board. I already have, Michael said quietly. David froze. What? Michael held his gaze. They reached out last week, independently, after the last round of layoffs. David's face paled. I told them, Michael continued, I wasn't interested in salvaging Nova. Not because I'm angry, but because I've already moved on. Sovereign was never about beating you. It was about building something better. David swallowed hard. So that's it. You're just going to let it die? Michael leaned in slightly. No, David. You're going to let it die. I'm just choosing not to save it. Silence. David looked down at the table, ashamed or pretending to be. You don't have to do this. You could be a bigger man. I am, Michael said. That's why I'm not dragging your name through the mud. That's why I let the product speak for itself. That's why I'm walking away from a merger that would slow me down. He turned to leave, then paused. But for the record, you didn't just lose a company. You lost the last person who ever believed in you. And with that, he walked out into the San Francisco sun. There was no need for revenge, because David wasn't dangerous anymore. He was irrelevant. 6 months later, Michael stood alone on a quiet hill overlooking San Francisco. The skyline shimmered in the distance, familiar yet somehow new. He breathed in the evening air, phone tucked in his pocket. Notifications buzzing with new user signups, speaking invites, and messages from founders asking for advice. He smiled. Sovereign had just crossed 1 million active users. What started as a late-night rebellion in his kitchen had become a global platform. Universities were teaching it. Nonprofits were deploying it. Enterprises were adopting it to replace bloated, closed-source legacy systems. But Michael wasn't chasing growth anymore. He had built something honest, something resilient, something that couldn't be stolen. And more importantly, he had built himself back. For a long time, he thought success would feel like revenge, that seeing David fall would complete the arc. But it didn't. David was gone, his name a footnote in a cautionary tale, and yet Michael didn't feel triumphant. He felt whole. The betrayal had nearly broken him, but it also revealed who he really was. Not just a builder, a survivor, a leader, a man who could be knocked down, humiliated, erased, and still rise again stronger than before. His phone buzzed again. A message from Priya, big update. Want to meet at the lab? We've got something exciting to show you. He texted back a thumbs up, slipped his phone away, and took one last look at the city. Then he turned and walked calmly toward the future. Not running, not chasing, just ready.